Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Thanks for thanks for joining me. I have Kim Kaiser here as a part of a project that started for Dr. Janet Brito's Sexual Health School and has kind of continued into a series of interviews with people who, among other things, identify as OCSB pathway practitioners, people who have studied the out of control sexual behavior pathway model and in some way use it in their clinical practice. So I'm going to get some front lighting here. Okay, good. And so, Kim, I realized too that I don't know that I have a great intro for you, but if I was going to try to intro you, and maybe you can fill in some of the blanks, um, you are a psychologist.
I'm a licensed counselor.
Okay,
I'm working on my clinical psychology doctoral
got
work.
it. So a
Yeah.
licensed counselor in the state of South Dakota,
Yes.
and you're in Sioux Falls, South Dakota right now. That's where you're talking to me from.
Yes.
And you have a private practice there. You run a business with associates, and you do individual and group, and you have it's a group practice as well. It's not just you.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to say about the work and your practice more generally before we focus on the OCSB work?
Yeah. Just that I'm an ASEC certified sex therapist and EMDRIA certified EMDR therapist. So I do a lot of work with trauma and sexuality.
Great. Um, Great. Thank you so much for adding that. And um, I will just start off with if there was something or some things that initially drew you to the out of control sexual behavior pathway model. What was it, or what were they?
Um, I think the earliest days, probably when I first joined ASEC, this is over 10 years ago. I was at a conference, it was in Minneapolis, and I saw Doug's talk there. He delivered a talk on OCSB, and it might have been, I don't know if it was one of the first talks or I don't, but it seemed pretty novel at the time. I'd never heard anything like that. And I think I was struck by the intellectual rigor of the model and Doug's presentation, and then just Doug's um, the quality of the qualities that Doug exuded as a person. It just attracted me to learning more about the OCSB model.
I appreciate this intellectual rigor and qualities that Doug exuded. Any recollections about something about either the academics that he was talking about that align with things that were important to you, or just something about the qualities that as a speaker and as a person he seemed to be exuding?
Yeah, I think at that time the predominant model was the sex addiction model, and it was very 12-step oriented. And I think that Patrick Carnes' book, I forget the title, the one that kind of came out, the first like major book on sex addiction.
Out of the
That was
shadows.
a yes, all that framework seemed um, like a good start in terms of providing some descriptions and a way to frame what we see in clinical practice, but it didn't provide. I think to me, what seemed like an affirming uh, stance on the behaviors. It seemed like a little bit leaving the client in a negative experience. Uh, and also, I think not really, I mean, to me as a clinician scientist, not really maybe rooted in science as much. I know there is a lot of scientific literature on addiction and sexuality. But at the time when I was introduced to OCSB, there was something, and it could have just been, I'd never seen a lot of sex addiction therapists or researchers speak at that time either. But I was struck by the amount of literature and the sophistication of the way Doug was presenting the problem, that had this also compassionate, non-judgmental view of the behavior, that I'd never sensed before. And Doug was just highly energetic, and I just remember he was like bouncing around the room, and just like and everyone was just kind of, it was like standing room only, and everyone was just kind of like listening. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop, just like listening, because it was exciting to have somebody present something that we hadn't really seen before as clinicians. And to have all this, Doug is a highly, I think, rigorous academic in his approach to what he studies and writes about. And that really came through to me as being a legitimate model to explore.
And from that talk it was in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
And from that talk in Minneapolis, where did you take some of that? I'll use a word, it sounds like inspiration, to keep exploring. I don't know if inspiration is a fair word.
Yeah. Well, at the time it was very new. And so there wasn't a lot out there. And so I think you kind of take it back, and I don't know when Doug's first book was published. I think over the years I toyed with starting a group, but I slowly started to weave the model into my individual work as soon as Doug's book was published. And so it just slowly built over time. And I think it wasn't until I joined the consultation groups with other clinicians like you, who are really using that model as their model, that I think I became fully immersed in like the ongoing training, and consultation using the model, the nuances, how to think about it while you're doing other types of therapies, and do it individually versus group. So it was just a gradual process over time.
I'll just say as an aside, it's always been a fascinating thing that I think Doug and Michael are really clear. It's a model, not a theoretical orientation. It's sort of a clinical model for helping people to find levels of care and treatment that are most appropriate for where they are struggling with problematic sexual behavior, and not a new theoretical orientation that is for people to sort of, learn or immerse in, or something like that. So I don't know. I just find myself reminding myself and others of that. I think all that to say, the application of this pathway could look really, really different depending on the theoretical lens of the practitioner, because it's in and of itself, it's not a theoretical lens.
Yes, I agree. And it took me a while to figure that out. So for me, it landed on a foundation in interpersonal group psychotherapy. And then, so that's like the OCSB groups I run are, they're the classic Yalom style interpersonal group, with the model kind of laid over that. And so that's what's worked for me. But I've come to appreciate that the model has a lot of flexibility, in that you don't have to be oriented in a certain way or just practice through that lens. You can layer it in a way that works for your style and how you like to work as a clinician.
And Kim, are there things about that Yalom style interpersonal group, with the model laid over it, that you're finding rewarding currently?
I think that what is really inspiring to myself, and I think freeing for group members, is the ability to have sexual health conversations with others who have out of control sexual behavior. Sexual health conversations usually just don't happen at all. And if they do happen, they're usually medical. And so you have a group of people who've come together to work on a lot of problems because of their sexual behavior, whether it's infidelities and problems in their relationship, or financial problems, even legal problems. Obviously, a lot of distress around what's happening. And also in the model, it includes this idea of erotic conflicts. So you get people that are maybe used to being told in their relationship, like that behavior or that sexual preference is strange, or that doesn't belong in our marriage or our relationship, or I don't accept that. And in the OCSB group, people can actually talk to one another about who they are as a sexual person, and talk about what it looks like for that to be expressed in a way that has a health component, both for themselves and the people they're with. And they can do that. I run mixed gender groups. So they can do that and mixed orientation. They can do that with people of the same gender, other gender, same orientation, different sexual orientation. And it's the amount of intimacy in the room, because in an interpersonal group, we explore people's relationships to each other. So when you talk about having sexual health conversations with people that are normally out of control with their sexual behavior, we're talking about real emotional intimacy about sexual intimacy. And it's usually the first time people have ever experienced that in their lives. So it's really I think magical at times to see people have this shift in going from risky sexual behavior that obviously they've somehow gotten habituated to be somewhat either detached or comfortable with, to feeling very afraid to having sexual health conversations about what they desire, their preferences in an actual healthy context, and over time grow to that to be their preference because they choose it because they see the rewards. The problematic behavior becomes less desirable for all kinds of other reasons as well. But
I'm just writing, they choose this because they see the rewards. The problematic sexual behavior becomes less desirable.
that's my experience, because true, like, sexual and emotional intimacy is ultimately more satisfying than detached, high risk, and harmful sexual behavior.
You have me thinking of the principles that, we have pleasure, mutual pleasure is one of the principles. And I'm also, when you say is more satisfying, like I'm thinking about sexual health principles like consent, like non-exploitation, like honesty, like the levels of satisfaction that can be brought to one when they're in these practices around these 6 sexual health principles that we talk about.
Yes. And most people, I would say that have OCSB behavior don't have any experience with that, or very limited. And they also have a lot of shame around any true vulnerability around emotional or sexual intimacy.
There's a couple things I want to loop back to that have really caught my attention. Well, first, I just want to go way back because you've mentioned this a couple of times. You said, I like that people have the ability to have sexual health conversations with someone who's experiencing out of control sexual behavior. And then I think you mentioned sexual health conversations in one other place that we've been talking here a few minutes. Choosing sexual health conversations because they can see the rewards. Especially when they might be speaking with real emotional intimacy about sexual intimacy, often for the first time. So as you're mentioning sexual health conversations, I'm just curious, and maybe this is for people less familiar with the model, how do you know as a clinician, how do you know outside of your clinical work when you're in a sexual health conversation, or when you're facilitating an interaction where other people are in a sexual health conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think as a sex therapist, we do that all day with our clients. I don't think it has to be on any particular topic. I think it's about human sexuality, and it's not necessarily education. It's about the way I would see it in like the OCSB group, for example, is that we're talking about things in a way that has qualities of health. And that could be the principles of sexual health, but it could be other things too, like respect and, you know, non-judgment. I think there's, and we're talking about some of the most intimate things in someone's life, like their sexual preferences or maybe boundary crossings that they've had. And how do we look at that? For example, if someone has a boundary crossing, something that's not on their sexual health plan, like having anonymous sex or using a sex worker or masturbating in excess to the way they define it as not being sexual health, we can actually talk about, well, why was that unhealthy for you? You know, and what would make masturbation healthy? What would be part of sexual health for you around that behavior? And I think this is woven into every aspect of not only the acts of sex, but how one communicates to group members about it, how they report, how they communicate to their partners or other people in their life about it. Because once they can learn to talk about it with each other and they can use their voice to reframe a lot of the behaviors that have never been spoken about or been spoken about through a trauma lens or an abuse lens, then all of a sudden everything about sexuality kind of shifts and I think opens.
If I'm hearing you, they find other words, other language, places to say it that are safer in some ways different than the ways that they've been talking about it and expressing it before. And you said everything shifts about sexuality. Can you say a little bit more about, from your lens as a clinician, what you've seen shift?
I think that one of the biggest things is the amount of shame. And what that gives way to is a sense of this affirmation and confidence that who I am as a sexual person is okay. If it pleases me and it's consensual, you know, it's okay. So there's an acceptance. With that acceptance over time grows a confidence, reduction in anxiety, distress, hiding, the need for a double life. And just less burden from having to carry all that.
Those are some shifts. Less shame, more affirmation, more confidence. If it's, you name two of the sexual health principles, if it's pleasurable and consensual, then it's okay. And there can be a confidence to come out of hiding and not have a double life. I guess I want to loop back to you brought up erotic conflicts before. Even if someone gets skillful at expressing some of those things, they may still be in partnerships or faith communities or social communities where people still might say, well, that's strange, I don't accept that. So I'm also thinking about ways that people come to find their own voice, even when there are dissenting voices in their homes or different communities about the things they're coming to believe about their sexual or their sexual
Yes.
identity.
Yes. Yeah, I think working through that a lot of times, and the other thing that's so powerful about the group, and this is something I hear from group members over and over, is this is the first time that I've ever heard anybody say they like the same thing or they struggle with the same thing. And so many times when people have erotic conflicts, it's because of things like sexual interests that are diverse or even sexual orientation, being maybe bisexual and being in a heterosexual marriage, and being able to talk about that, and get affirmation and validation from other people that it's okay. It's somehow, I think, what people carry into their lives is that it makes being in communities that maybe don't accept that a little bit more tolerable, because they feel like they've gotten in some ways, not that they needed external permission, but the group is this space that says, hey, this is okay. You're not weird because you like this, or you're not an odd person or a bad person because this is what turns you on. And being able to explore that, gives them this sense that, hey, I'm not alone. And so I can, I don't have to disclose this. And if it's in communities where it has to be, or relationships where it is part of something that's disclosed, like in your partnership, or if you're gay in a faith community or something where people do know, then I think there becomes just a confidence in being able to advocate for yourself and resolve that conflict interpersonally in a different way than if you're hiding. And then long term, what I've seen is an advocacy that can even be greater than the individual. They can advocate on behalf of communities of like individuals.
Yes. I'm writing feverishly because there's so much that you're saying, in terms of getting affirmation, being able to talk about sexual interests that are diverse or sexual orientation. And it makes, your words were, it makes being in communities that don't accept that a little more tolerable. The group reminds them you're not a bad person because this turns you on. And it's a confidence in being able to advocate for yourself, and often resolve conflict differently than if you're hiding.
Yes. Yes. I've seen that over and over again, just with members, people that are in these groups.
And does that bring some sort of satisfaction for you in the way that you prefer to do work clinically, when you can do it that way?
I find that running groups at this stage of my career, we all have different stages in our careers, and there's something about, at the heart of, I always think of like John Lennon, like all you need is love. uh, there's something at the heart of, as a clinician, I mean, there's obviously, biologically based mental health issues, but there's something, I think, core to most mental health problems, and that includes OCSB, not a mental health disorder, but it's definitely a clinical symptom set of hypersexuality, compulsivity, and then distress and poor consequences. That those behaviors are rooted in attachment ruptures, in attachment trauma, and doesn't have to be big T trauma like rape or incest or even abuse of some kind. It can be in any kind of attachment rupture. And the seeking, either being desired or the sexual release of an orgasm, or the zoning out of masturbation or pornography, seeking that to soothe whatever the fallout was from that attachment rupture, that attachment wounding. And then being able to see that healed, because when you're doing individual work with a client, it only goes so far, because you are still in kind of an objective authoritative role. Even if you're, not operating that way, you aren't in a peer relationship with a client. But in a therapeutic group, people have attachment repairs with peers. And to see that play out and to see, it's almost what I call like the EMDR of just like interpersonal psychotherapy. Changes happen very quickly when people feel loved, when people feel accepted. And I think at this stage of my career, being able to see a larger impact, you know, in groups or communities is extremely fulfilling.
Kim, I want to just express some gratitude with almost being at full time together on this half hour. I want to express some gratitude for you making this time, and a couple things. One, is there anything that you haven't gotten a chance to say that you'd like to? And also, could you let people know how they find you if someone should see this video months or years from now and they want to get in touch?
Yeah, well, I would like to say thank you for doing this because you have such a commitment and to the model and just a beautiful presence. And it's really wonderful to spend time with you.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to reach me, you can just Google me, Kimberly Kaiser. It should come right up.
Keiser.
Yes, and just Kimberly Kaiser, sex therapist. It should come right up.
Great, great, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this time. And I'm going to stop recording now. Really appreciate you making this time to say some things about your clinical practice and where it integrates with the OCSB pathway model. Thank you.
Thank you.